All right, hey, it's Scott Penfold, and this is another edition of the Loaded Radio podcast. Thanks for tuning in, as usual, and great show this week, man. It's going to be a one-on-one conversation with Ihsahn. Now, he's got the new self-titled album coming out. It's going to be dropping on February 16th via Candlelight, and people may know Ihsahn from Emperor, of course, you know, one of the pioneers, really, of what we know as black metal today. And this new album is quite a massive project. I mean, one part is essentially black metal, what you would expect, the metal that Ihsahn is known for, but there's also another part which is orchestral, and he's written really essentially as a symphony, almost like as a soundtrack to the story that is this project he's releasing. I mean, this guy is a serious songwriter and composer, extremely talented, and he has been in metal since essentially the early 90s, and the stuff he's got out now is just sounding so good too. Really self-produced this new album as well, scored over the course of 3 years. The metal version has been mixed by Jens Bogren, and the orchestral version mixed by Joel Doley, with both versions being mastered by Tony Lindgren. But before we get down to talking with Ihsahn, I want to remind you, check out loadedradio.com for all your hard rock and metal news, updated constantly, as well as a 24-hour live radio station there for you too, including live DJs and big name interviews, and as well past episodes of this very podcast, Loaded Radio podcast, available there too. And the free Loaded Radio app, you can get that, like I said, for free. You download that and bring us with you wherever you go, okay? And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast via YouTube, we just ask you for a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you like to. Or if you're just listening to us via any other channel, which would be either Spotify or Apple Podcasts or read the Loaded Radio app, just sit back and enjoy the conversation we're going to have right now, though, with this man here. He's got the new self-titled album coming out, like I said, February 16th. And a lot of people know him from the band Emperor, of course, which are still kind of around. And his name is Ihsahn. And we're so glad to have him on the podcast with us this week. Ihsahn, how you doing, man?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It's a great honor to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
I do want to talk about your 8th studio album here, the self-titled album. Now, from what I understand, is it a concept album? I mean, is there actual linear story that goes along with the album?
Indeed, very much so. And this is my first one to be this kind of linear in its narrow, and like there's a real narrative and a real story behind it. In fact, there are two linear stories, one for the metal version of the album and one for the orchestral. They kind of bleed into each other.
And I love the fact that you have a metal version and an orchestral version. I mean, but before we get back into, I guess, the linear story and how it weaves together, I did want to ask, was this something that you set out to do, or did it just sort of develop out of your sessions and creativity?
Well, this was one of the main ideas before even writing any of the music. So the intention was kind of to try to lean on aspects of my music that is kind of down the center of what I've been doing since my very beginning. Now, over 3 decades ago. Yeah. And it was like black metal, band, and orchestral stuff. So at the heart of this is like, black metal record, supported by, an ensemble of like a traditional symphony orchestra, building on the inspirations from metal, but also from soundtracks, very much of the old school Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, Bernard Herrmann style, and trying to make an arrangement with the orchestra in particular to support the metal version, but that would arrange it in such a way that it would work independently as its own thing, and hence kind of give a new dimension and a different dynamic and emotional insight and experience of essentially the same music. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I get you. And I think it's a fascinating, very cool thing. And if anybody could have pulled it off, it would definitely be you, just with your past and the way you've written before and what you've given. Now, are these, like you were saying, though, it's two linear stories that sort of bleed into each other a little bit. So is it like a sequel or like a sidequel, or kind of like, how would the story unfold?
This is a very, traditional story that I wrote, like a synopsis for a novel, like not in its entirety, sure. but like a backbone for the lyrics. And the intention was, of course, to create something meaningful and a world with a very classic Joseph Campbell style hero's journey, and which most movies, build on this kind of story arch, and that gave me an opportunity to have reoccurring leitmotifs throughout the songs and kind of explore that soundtrack side of writing. And I grew up on, conceptual albums. Like my favorite Iron Maiden album is Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which follows this kind of narrative. Yeah, I did the best. And it also has, the keyboards,
Yes.
the extra. So there's no, it's that album has been both consciously and probably subconsciously very influential on me for doing, the stuff that I do. Is like the blueprint of an amazing album, isn't it? My protagonist, goes through this phase and it builds, it leans heavily on symbolism from the antique, with Dionysus and Apollo. And there's also these dreams, that kind of illustrate and point to the orchestral storyline. And it's, as I've said many times in this phase of trying to explain things, it's not that important to me that people get my story, the important thing is that the feeling of cohesion and something that triggers the imagination, whether that be from the lyrics or the music and the sound of it, and that people this way when I presented the two versions of the albums to friends and colleagues and family without any background, they came, a lot of them came back to me. It's like, I feel like I'm watching a movie. So I think just instinctually, you don't need to understand anything to just have a feeling of there being something behind this. And it's literally, again, like the albums that I love, where you listen to the whole album and, Seventh Son, song by song, amazing songs. But I think for those so inclined as myself, looking deeper into the artwork and the lyrics and seeing this whole, the thing as a whole makes it even, it keeps on giving. Make something that is, it's not, where you maybe discover something new with every listen. That's the ideal, isn't it?
It's certainly so. It really is. And I'm all about that too. I miss, holding on to an actual physical album and experiencing it front to back and reading the, the gatefold and everything. To me, that was such a powerful thing, especially when it came to metal, because metal, as you know, it's such a great storytelling genre of music. So
no, and it's the same metal. It's all about this big words and the big myths. It's grandiose and larger than life. And that's why when I went to see the Seventh Son tour, October 5th, 1988, and since that moment I've never had a plan B with my life. Honestly, and it's I guess making an album like this, or like a dual album even like this, considering people's general attention span, for in 2024, it's probably the worst idea ever. But it's a tall order to get people to try to get into a dual album with two parallel storylines. Mm-hmm. But then again, starting a black metal band in '91 was also at the time the worst idea ever. So I have a good track record for making bad decisions like that. At the same time, with now people, I guess this is just me theorizing, but all social media and everything, and you know what your favorite artist had for dinner, and it's all very mundane and personal and stuff like that. I think there's a reason why bands like Ghost or Sleep Token or Rammstein, where there obviously are characters on stage. Mm-hmm. It's much more of a theatrical display, and aren't we? I think that's why we're drawn to this kind of music and those kind of shows. We want the spectacle. We don't want the guy next door kind of feeling. You want to feel like. When I saw Iron Maiden, just being in the same room, I was 13, like I'm breathing the same air. Mm-hmm. Of course, I believe I've never met any of those, but like I've met some of my heroes along the way, and they're, some of them are just amazing, down to earth, great people. And on the private level, you want that, but on stage, when I've gotten to know Rob Halford a little bit, and he's the nicest guy. But on stage, I want to see the god of metal.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Yeah.
I completely understand. One thing you've always done so well, and we have touched on this already somewhat, but I mean, you've always been able to, you really essentially introduced orchestral and symphonic sounds into black metal, into extreme metal. And you made it work so well. I've heard it done by some people, then it didn't work out well. You've always seemed to make it work so well. It's always been cohesive. What inspired you to do that?
Well, first, thank you. It's literally at the same time we were listening to a lot of black metal. We were also listening to probably just as much of like horror movie soundtracks.
Yeah,
and that's what made me want to that, and Iron Maiden. And Judas Priest and Dio, having keyboards in their music, that extra layer of epicness, if you could say, and just also the emotional, push and pull of the dynamics of an orchestral piece, is something that is hard to get in a dense, extreme metal expression where everything is on 10 from start to finish. But at least my idea, I remember this from like when we did the first keyboard layers, that at least we could simulate some of that dynamics by adding these elements, as they came in and out of the music, and to get more of a dynamic flow to the music, really. And of course, in the beginning, it was just Roland keyboard sounds.
Yeah.
And I'm no music education at all. I'm all self-taught. So of course, it's been quite a journey from making very feeble, just ensemble patches on a keyboard,
right,
to trying to write properly for orchestra, as I did with this one. It's like probably unnecessarily complicated, but I wrote this out as not with patches per se, but like I wrote it as it could have been played by an orchestra, like instrument for instrument. So, wow. And a big, as a learning, I always like to add, like educational elements to my album processes to kind of build on the old toolbox,
Could you even see yourself one day even releasing a project that would have no black metal whatsoever, but in fact write an orchestral piece or something of that nature? Can you see that happening?
I would love to, of course, at one point maybe have the opportunity to either write or like co-write, be involved in the soundtrack.
Yeah,
to
that'd be cool.
Movie or something, or a series or whatever. But that always fascinated me. I mean, I love so much of the, I like orchestral music, but honestly, my gateway into orchestral music was, of course, horror movie soundtracks. Jerry Goldsmith's The Omen is still probably my favorite soundtrack of all time. And like John Williams, with the Star Wars thing, and Bernard Herrmann, the Psycho, what's not to love.
Yeah.
And but then again, as I've tried to showcase for a bit of the younger generation, where you listen to the Imperial March and like, oh, this is amazing, and then someone plays you Gustav Holst the Planets, with Mars. The Bringer of War is like, John Williams had his heroes too, so then you kind of snowball backwards in time a little bit.
I've heard a few tracks off of the album, and just really beautiful, the real substance there. Tell me about Pilgrimage to Oblivion. What can you tell me about that piece in particularly?
Well, it's early on in the storyline. It's just full of hubris and desperation, as the music kind of implies. But and it's probably one of the most extreme. Is the most extreme song on the album. Probably one of the most extreme songs that I ever did, possibly. It's really like violent and heavy. But it's but then again, if you take that, it's kind of a show. I think it's a good example of what some of my intention with doing the dual layer thing is that it's the same orchestral stems and arrangements that goes on both the metal version of the album and the individual orchestral. So it's basically the same thing. But of course, you lose a lot of the nuances of the orchestra in a dense metal mix. And as I said earlier on, like a lot of bands try to fit in a big orchestral arrangement on top of a big sounding metal production. And in some cases, as probably you and I both have experiences, like you try to fit two big things into one small space, which is the the spectrum of audio that you can use, and both have to become smaller. So Pilgrimage to Oblivion, musically, if you listen to the extreme version of the metal track, but exactly the same music. The opening of Pilgrimage on the orchestral version is literally just whispery, quiet tremolo cellos.
Oh wow!
It's the same music, but in another context. With another emotional impact. Hopefully, so that was, then I could kind of hopefully get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a very cool concept, man. I can't wait to hear the orchestral version. Another song I did want to ask you about as well is The Distance Between Us. What can you tell me about that one in particular?
Conceptually, this it's getting closer to the end of the album, and hence the narrative, and both musically and lyrically, it's more of a reflective matter. There's some experience. Our protagonists have had some experience and some ups and downs, and this is closing in, more reflective of a past life, and settling with some pros and cons. You could put it that way.
So it's self-produced. So it was strictly you in the studio. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I always do that.
Yeah,
but of course it's brilliantly. The metal version is brilliantly mixed by Jens Bogren, as since my third album. Jens or someone else at Fascination Street Studios in Sweden has been handling the mix and the mastering. And the orchestral version was mixed by a new friend of mine, Joel Dorley, in France, who specializes in those kind of productions. So but apart from that, I like to, piece the puzzle together myself.
Certainly, absolutely. You were mentioning earlier something I'm kind of thinking about now. You'd mentioned influences like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and of course Dio. I mean, I'm hearing classic metal and power metal. Why did you go black metal? What pointed you in that direction, particularly for you?
I think I started out pretty early, with playing in bands and stuff. Or like first, I started out with just my guitar and my Fostex 4-track recorder and doing demos on my own. Then I kind of ventured into like kids bands. But I was 13 when I joined the first band I had together with my colleague later in Emperor with Samath.
Yep.
And we formed Emperor. Then it was like a heavy metal band. And then there were some iterations, with some different members, and we ventured into thrash. And prior to Emperor, we had 3 different death metal bands.
Yeah.
Some of which were like influenced by like early Sepultura, or then more into Morbid Angel and blah blah blah. And then going down that rabbit hole in a sense, getting into Bathory and Celtic Frost and some of the more even darker and more kind of undergroundish. So it's not really that strange. I mean, I was pulled to the extreme music, and then I guess I just continued that journey and ended up with black metal, which was very, I think, typical of my generation in that time. And I see it's different now, because you see a lot of bands who just start out with some form of extreme metal, but there's really no kind of experience with the more traditional stuff.
Right.
So it's like people who could play insane black metal stuff or extreme, death metal stuff, but they couldn't, hang on to a 12-bar blues if their life depended on it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a different approach now. But I think it's just for me personally, it's just this curiosity of music and trying to expand my experience, with writing and performing and living, breathing music. Really,
yeah.
It's all very, very nerdy and self-centered, I'm afraid.
I understand completely. You did mention Emperor. I mean, is Emperor still currently an active embodiment or anything? Is Emperor still active?
Yeah, but just as a live thing. We never really got to tour a lot when we were an active band, because honestly, in the 90s, it wasn't really, black metal was still pretty much an underground thing.
Yeah.
And by the time that it became more of a not underground thing, it we quit.
Right.
So we're kind of picking up on different. We just last year we went to South America for the first time. I've had a privilege of playing to lots of fans there who had a relationship to all these old songs. And so we're kind of keeping it alive in that sense, but not creatively in any new form.
Could that change in the future, do you think?
I wouldn't see how.
Really?
I mean, it's no. I mean, I'm kind of a bit. If I'm honest, I ended up writing the entire Last Emperor album on my own.
I know.
And then I kind of ended up as a solo artist. And if I was kind of leading ahead, just on the musical side back then, I've been living in that rabbit hole now for 25 more years.
Yeah.
So it's and also it's just like we ended up because we had creative differences, and it's if you listen to my output since 2001 and you listen to Soundnote's output since 2001 or Trim for that matter, it's obvious that we wanted the creatively different things. And there's really, the way I work now, it's really, I see really no limitations, creatively. I guess I'm just one of those people who enjoy writing, solitarily, and not the writing in tandem. And even back in the day, I think it was cool to jam along, for some of the early stuff, but I very soon entered into writing stuff down and compiling stuff, and that then rehearsing it, and can I say it's something that it's this writing together thing, which for a lot of people works great, but it's kind of particular, I think, for maybe pop and rock music. Mm-hmm. In some sense, you other art forms. So like even other music, like if you take in classical music, of a little collaboration, and you don't really see authors writing novels together, or of course there's a big team of people making films, but it's very often someone writes the script and someone has the vision to produce it, but it's often like a solitary thing.
No, I get you, man. I completely get you.
I hope I'm not saying one way is better, but it's just, for me, it's I know that if I had a dime for every time people ask me, will there be another Emperor record, as they say, and there's a compliment in there, people
Sure.
had a good relationship to music that I was part of, and so for some nostalgic reason they want more of that, which is a great thing.
Certainly
but I'm not
is.
sure, on the other hand, if you ask, turn the table around, like what kind of Emperor album could we possibly do that would satisfy that kind of need? Name me one band that did a comeback album like that, and people like, fuck yeah, this is, even better than their early stuff.
Oh, that's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah. So it's like, it's a lose-lose situation in a way.
Understood. Now, what about Peccatum? Is that completely done as well?
Yeah, it's that was a phase for us that was really experimental and cool, and I think just Nemosign Productions, that me and my wife still run, became kind of the umbrella instead of Peccatum, being the band. Nemosign Productions became kind of the umbrella under which we, continued that creative collaboration. And it just kind of, Peccatum again also kind of split up into my solo band and Heidi's Star of Ash, right. And she's still my main kind of sparring partner for all things creative, whom I trust to have honest opinions and honest feedback on everything. So it just naturally evolved into to Nemosign Productions, where we do all our creative output and not as a band per se.
Right. Well, we were talking there about Emperor when the band first started. Black metal was still very underground. I mean, when you see things like Lords of Chaos or Until the Light Takes Us and these kind of these movies, these films, would you say that they're accurate in what black metal was back then in the early '90s or the early to mid '90s? Would you say that they're accurate?
I have no idea, but I'm sorry, I haven't seen them.
Oh, it's okay. but what was black metal like in the early '90s, though? I mean, it seemed very dangerous back then.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you think back, on being 16, 17, you probably, most of us did some bad decisions, and it seemed cool at the time.
Sure, yeah.
And it was all just what you did, and then it's like just after the fact that it's been kind of mythologicalized, if you can call it that.
Sure, yeah.
So, but I think the fact that it was a bunch of teenagers kind of got lost in, all the makeup and everything, and for better or worse. I think if the whole genre was presented, without that kind of theatrical element, it might not be the same. That spectacle was part of the integrity and experience of the genre. And so I think sometimes I've read back on it. There's been articles or everything. It's like a mythological kind of perspective on certain events, which I personally experienced as quite mundane and just like us guys going to a show.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, but then again, it's probably just me. It's almost had all the connections, if you will. I've always just been the tag along nerd doing the music. if that makes sense. So maybe and I see that now that some people are more concerned with kind of the legacy of the scene and everything, and I'm still just nerding on into the future. So it's just different perspective, and I'm not that nostalgic about that time, I think. No.
Well, what do you think of today's black metal? I mean, are you listening to anyone that's out there today right now in extreme metal?
Unfortunately, I'm very bad at picking up on stuff like that, and I do get to listen to some new music. My son in particular is more of an extreme, music fan. But he also tends to go with a bit of the older bands, but most of all, it's just because I it's this work mode thing. So the analytical side of me kind of kicks in if it's familiar ground like that, and so hence I try to go for other genres where I can't pick it apart that much for inspiration and relaxation, if you will. And the only thing and black metal today, I think it's a lot of nostalgia attached to it, and I'm kind of missing, what's the new dangerous thing,
right?
Because every decade it has its own new extreme where old folks think like it can't get any more extreme.
Yeah,
but it always did. But so far, it's I haven't really seen that.
I totally get you, man. I mean, I did want to ask you though. I mean, today, speaking of today's music, I mean, Matt Heafy's Ibaraki project. How much involvement did you have in that, actually?
We talked about this for ages. Since 2011 or something like that, when he came to visit me the first time.
Yeah,
and it's just time. So it was just that during the pandemic we had time to do it because he approached me. Over a decade ago to if I wanted to produce his solo record, because he's always been a fan of the more extreme black metal side.
Oh, he loves black metal, yeah.
So to get into that route, and I think originally he thought of making something more in the vein of sounding like what he associated with Norwegian black metal, but then over time, and us discussing ideas and directions, I think that we ended up in a place where he explored more of his kind of Japanese roots and kind of found similar parallels in his heritage like that. And it became a different thing, but kind of and what was important for me, being involved with it. Like I wanted it to be very personal for him and to be very like an expression with a lot of integrity, and he did an amazing job kind of piecing all that together, conjuring that up, and we co-wrote some stuff, and I kind of recorded and put the album together for producing it per se.
Yeah.
So it was great process. I'm very, very proud of what we managed to pull together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I really enjoy that. Thank you so much, Ihsahn. It's been such a privilege talking to you and such a pleasure. I really hope I get to do it again someday soon, and I can't wait to hear the whole album, both albums. I'm really excited.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the support.
Anytime. All the best.
Cheers, mate.
All right, and there he is. That's Ihsahn, and the self-titled album drops February the 16th, and it is a massive, massive undertaking by this guy. Really, really a guy that just pushed himself to the edge with his process, with his creativity, and it really, really does shine through so beautifully in the tracks I've heard thus far. Don't forget to check out loaderradio.com with all your hard rock and metal news as well. We got the live radio station there too. Check that out. Download the free Loader Radio app, okay? Because you'll be happy that you did, because hey, the price is right. It's free. And I'll talk to you again next week on an all-new edition of the Loader Radio podcast, okay? I'm Scott Penfold, and we'll talk to you then.
Loaded Radio.